talk to you about phonics. I just wanted to ask a quick question of the people who are participating. Let me just clear the poll so I can ask you a question and see your response. Oh no, that's disappeared now. Okay. I'd just like to ask how many of you have already had any training in phonics or who are currently using phonics. It would just be good to have an indication of that if you'd like to indicate using the green arrow. Let's have a look. Okay, so some of you are using phonics in school. That's really helpful, thank you. Okay, that's really helpful to know that quite a few of you then have either had training or you're using phonics. So hopefully you'll have questions and you'll also be able to engage with the sorts of things that I'm saying and suggesting. And I'll try and make sure that we leave a little bit of time at the end so that we've got time to answer some questions. Okay, so as you know, I'm Gill Budgell. I have been a primary teacher in UK primary mainstream schools. That was many years ago now. And I trained to teach 3 to 8-year-olds. So I've always been a primary English and early years specialist. That's what I've always enjoyed doing. In my early days of teaching, I found that I had quite a few bilingual children in my North London classroom, and I felt ill-equipped to know to help them with their English, and so that's what led me to do some ESL training. I did an RSA certificate, and in time that led to my frustration around not having the resources I wanted, and I decided to become a publisher and work on developing resources. So for over 20 years now, I've worked either as a teacher or a writer or a research consultant to develop the sorts of resources that I hope teachers are finding useful. Okay, so I think let's make a start. What I'm going to do in the next 45 minutes or so is talk around these questions. I hope you can all see the slides very clearly. We're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by phonics, although as so many of you have had training, I think you probably know that, but I think it might be useful to recap on those principles. And then talk a little bit about how it's different, by which I mean how it's different from the sort of phonics that we might have done perhaps 10 years ago, because I'm going to talk specifically about synthetic phonics. So I want to talk to you about what the differences might be. Then we'll talk about how we think it can help bilingual learners, and finally we'll look at some of the resources linked to, you can see I put them some indication of some of the books at the bottom of my slides, and I've got some here which I'll be able to hold up and show you as we talk through. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Phonic Explorer books and how they might be able to help you in the classroom. Maybe some of you are using them already, which would be great. Okay, so let's go forward. This is a slide I always like to show, and if any of you have heard me speaking before, you'll know that this is one of my favorite slides, and sometimes I get you as the audience to think about all the different possible ways you could spell the word phonics, and I make you do that before I show it, but today I've revealed it very quickly. Because in a way, this explains the difficulty of learning English. This slide shows that these are all, or pretty much all, legitimate ways of spelling the word. I say pretty much all because phonics with double F at the beginning is probably cheating, because typically we don't use double F at the beginning of spelling English words. But most of the others are combinations of letters that if you understand the alphabetic code of English, you would be able to work out how to read the word. And so it's teaching this to children and helping them to become confident about this that really is the secret to using phonics in a way that might help them. I don't know if any of you have seen that before. So what is phonics? We need to teach children that for each letter, or for each word that's made up of letters, we can work out the smallest utterance of sound. And the smallest sound that's uttered we call a phoneme. And so as part of the phonics that we want children to understand, we explain to them that they need to understand the sounds that are represented by the letters. Or to say it another way, the phonemes that are represented by the graphemes. I'll talk about that a little bit more. It comes apparently from the Greek word phonema. We say typically that there are 44 phonemes within the English language. Now clearly we've got 26 letters, but if we're going to make 44 sounds from 26 letters, then clearly you have to be able to use different combinations of letters to make those sounds. And we do that with about 128 different letter patterns. So it's really very challenging to work with young children to go from 26 to make 44 using about 128 different letter combinations. It's really quite challenging. Let's have a little bit more of a look at that concept. Okay, so if you look at the bottom of this slide, you can see in English, we call this deep orthography. And that's because the relationship between the number of letters and the number of sounds isn't very clear. As I've just explained, we have to get from the 26 up to the 40 plus spoken sounds. You will find, incidentally, depending on what sort of phonic resources you're using, that this varies. That's why we say 40 plus, because phonics isn't a science. It is a language, it is organic, it does vary from resource to resource. And so it's worth bearing that in mind, that there are very few categorical facts. And really, as teachers, we're very good, I think, at taking what we want to use and making it work in the classrooms for the children. I put the example of Spanish at the top. I've been doing a lot of work in Spain recently with bilingual teachers, mainly in Madrid, and it's quite interesting to note with Spanish that the contrast is extreme. We call this a shallow orthography because the number of sounds generally matches the number of letter patterns very well. And so this makes the teaching of Spanish much easier in many ways. I mean, clearly there are other challenges, and I'm learning Spanish myself at the moment, so I'm struggling with those. So although it's a shallow orthography, it still does make it, it's still quite tricky, but nowhere near as tricky as learning English. And obviously once you start comparing these sorts of things with your own language, you think about the language that the children are bringing into the classroom, and I'm sure you do that anyway. It's very helpful, but to think about that in terms of phonics, to think about what sort of orthography the children are bringing with their first language and how that will help them more complicate their learning of English. Let's move on. This is a little bit of background. In the UK, in mainstream schools, there is a real emphasis at the moment from government level to teach phonics. And it has been said, drawing on world research evidence, that the systematic teaching of synthetic phonics, and we'll come back to this word synthetic phonics in a moment, is the best way to teach literacy to all children, and especially those aged 5 to 7. Now, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this is the case, but for L1 learners. There isn't a huge amount of evidence to suggest that this is true for bilingual learners, and I keep looking for further evidence of this, but in fact I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area. I want to go on today to talk about some of the areas where I think phonics, where this can be true for bilingual learners. I think there is something within phonics that's worth doing. But I think we have to do it with this caveat that actually we need to take the best of what we know of teaching English and the best of what we know from teaching phonics and try and merge them together so that we can be sure that what we're doing is helpful for bilingual learners. So that's a caveat really that I wanted to raise. This is the other thing that I'm very keen to say. We don't want people to think that teaching phonics is an end in itself. It really is, certainly with L1 learners, it certainly is a very short phase where we need to teach the children the alphabetic code so that they can learn to go on and enjoy reading. It isn't an end in itself. It's just a very short phase. So we learn to read so that we can read to learn. And that's really where we want to get to. We want to get the children to a point where they can read confidently and decode confidently so that they can get on and enjoy the language and understand it. So the other quote there is, it isn't just a method, it does have content. We do need to teach the content of the alphabetic code, and I'll explain that in a moment. And certainly with L1 learners, it's not optional, and I would suggest with bilingual learners, it's not either. It's really helpful to outline what the rules are, and the goal of teaching phonics must be comprehension. So we don't want it to be a replacement for high-quality, language-rich approaches, topic-rich approaches to teaching English. And we certainly don't want it to be a replacement for hands-on, engaging creativity. These are all fundamental to early years education and to learning any language. So that's my other caveat. Let's keep it in balance, in perspective. And in the same vein, I don't know if any of you have seen this chart before. This is something that underpins the UK National Curriculum for Teaching Reading. And I thought it would be useful to share because, again, it puts in perspective the place of phonics within a broad and rich language curriculum. So you can see that we have two axes. We have a vertical axis which is referencing language comprehension from good, and at the bottom, poor. I'll use the mouse perhaps to indicate that. Here we go. And then horizontally, you can see we have a word recognition axis, which goes from poor to good. Now, clearly, where we want most learners to be is in the upper right-hand quartile. This is, we want children to be able to easily recognize words and to understand them. So this is the best place for our learners to be. The worst possible place is bottom left, where children are neither recognizing words, they don't have the basic skills of reading, those very early fundamental decoding skills, and consequently their comprehension is poor. That's really not where we want our learners to be. This is an interesting place, top left, because this might be children who actually struggle with the basic skills of reading. They might have poor word recognition skills. They might be struggling with phonics, but actually when you talk to them orally, they might be quite strong and they might have a very good understanding. So here we might find that they would benefit from repeating or reinforcing some of the phonic language skills. And just to finish this, the bottom right quartile indicates children who perhaps have mastered the basic skills of reading. So they can decode very well, they understand the principles of the alphabetic code, they can read very complicated text because they can decode the words, even if they have a poor comprehension. Now, we really want children to be able to decode and understand. We used to call this barking at print, where children could literally read a complicated text but not understand it. So we want to ensure that our readers are as close to this top quartile as possible. So let's have a look now at how we might do that. So my second speech bubble on that initial slide was how is it different? And I thought it might be useful to talk a little bit about the sort of phonics that we've always done, because I think I'm right in saying that most of you will be doing phonics. You've probably been doing some sort of phonics for a long time. but it might have been a different, or it might be a different type of phonics. So I wanted to outline some of the differences now between analytic phonics, which is considered to be old-style phonics, and synthetic phonics, and have a look at how new style might be useful, and actually also what we want to hold on to from old style. We don't want to throw everything away because there's always good ideas to hang on to. So analytic phonics has usually tended to be taught in alphabetical order. So it has assumed that we can teach from A to Z. It has tended to be opportunistic. By this I mean that if you've got an English program, it might well have been that within a topic there might have been some vocabulary activities, there might have been some grammar activities, you might be doing lots of talking, and every now and again there might have been a phonics activity that picked up on some consonant, vowel, consonant work, or just said let's look for things beginning with a certain letter sound. But there would have been no developmental structure to that. It would just be a question of what opportunities are arising from this topic that we could pick up on. That's fundamental. And finally, with analytic phonics, it tends to be about patterns. There's nothing wrong with this. Clearly, we want to encourage children to look for patterns in language. So if they're studying the letter and the letter sound D, which makes the sound D, then we want them to be able to hear that sound at the beginning of different words. So if they can hear the D at the beginning of a word like dog, then they can also hear it, hopefully, at the beginning of dig or dip, or even longer words like dinosaur. And we want to encourage this. But similarly, if you look at the word dog, you'll see that there's an og-ness about it. There's the d at the beginning, and in analytic phonics we would say there's an og as well. And the thinking is that if you could read d og, then you would be more likely to be able to read og, as in fog, or og, as in frog. I hope you can hear my pronunciation as I'm presenting here, because the sounds are important. These are characteristic of old-style phonics. So let me move on and show you now some of the things that we want to try and encourage in synthetic phonics. Okay, in synthetic phonics, we would read a word like this. If the word is mud, we wouldn't say ud, just like I demonstrated with the previous screen. We want children to understand that for each letter, there's a letter sound. And we can teach them that. So we would say d. And we blend those sounds together, 3 letters. Sometimes we say, if you can see my fingers, we say to the children, there's 3 letters, 3 sounds. Let me make sure you can see. D. Blend them together, mud, mud. So we say the sounds and we blend to read. If we were trying to write that word, mud, we would say to the children, how do we write this word mud? Let's listen. Mud. We say we can hear, again, I'll just make sure you can see, d. If we can hear which letter do we write that makes the sound And we write the letter M. Which letter do we write that makes the sound And we write the letter U. D. Which letter do we write that makes the sound D? The sound D, sorry. We write the letter D. And then we blend them together to make sure that we've written the right word. D, mud. Yes, we've written the right word because we've used the right letters. So can you see that we're not looking for patterns in this instance? We're actually teaching the children that they need to know the sound that each letter makes, or letters. Actually, I'm just going to go, no, that's fine, I'll stay here. As part of synthetic phonics, I would say the other important thing is that children are part of understanding the terminology, and certainly as teachers, we want to be using the right sorts of terminology. So we do talk about phonemes. You might prefer to talk about letter sounds. That's this one here. We do talk about graphemes. You may prefer to talk about letters, letter shapes, or the way we write letters. We talk about sound talk, and that's just what I was demonstrating there. If I say, I like to play in the d. This is an example of sound talk, and the children can listen and see if they can hear which word I'm sound talking. It's sometimes referred to as robot talking as well, but the children find this quite fun. It's very good oral practice for listening into the letter sounds. We use consonants and vowels. I think there's no surprise there. We talk about segmenting. That's the skill for spelling. That's where we listen to a word and then we segment the sounds in order to spell it, as we just demonstrated with mud. We blend in order to read. So we read a word by blending the sounds, again, as we did with mud. And it's really important that we know that these two things, blending for reading and segmenting for spelling, are two sides of the same coin. They're reversible processes, and they're very, very closely connected. This can cause a problem in early language teaching, where often we lead with very strong oral work, and then we lead with very strong reading, and finally get to writing. But there is some evidence to suggest that if you can get children into writing a little bit sooner, so that they can see this relationship between the blending and segmenting, that it really helps with their understanding. The other things on here are this bottom one. I can't see, there's something in the way. The trigraphs, this is typically where we have 3 letters, 3 sounds, and digraphs, which we may talk about as 2 letters, 1 sound. I'm going to go on and talk about those a little bit more now. And mnemonics are very popular in phonics schemes, depending on which scheme you're using. It's very helpful for the children to try and help them to remember the letters and the letter sounds. If you devise little actions or you sing songs, these are very, very helpful for young children, and they're fun too. The pronunciation of the sounds in synthetic phonics is very important. In analytic phonics, we might have referred to letter names very commonly, and also we might have pronounced letters differently. So for example, this letter, M, we might have pronounced as M in the past. But with synthetic phonics, it's very important that we pronounce the sounds as purely as possible so that children can blend them. If you say M-A-D, it doesn't really sound like the word mud. But if you can say the sounds very purely, M-A-D, it helps the children to hear how you can blend the sounds to read the word. There's lots of help online for this. If you're not sure about how to say the sounds in a very pure way, this one would be f. This is m. This one is difficult. This one is very difficult because it's hard not to say on the end. But we want to say p as quietly as possible. It's a quiet, soft sound. This one is 2 letters and 2 sounds. Qua, qua. This one is This one is b. Again, a difficult sound not to put that schwa on the end. We really need to try and keep it short. And here we have an example of 2 letters, 1 sound, a C and a K together. Still say k, k in the back of your throat. And this little one here, I, I. So the vowel sounds are very important to get right. Okay, let's move on because time is ticking away and we've got quite a bit to get through. So the principles of the alphabetic code are these 4 things, and these will underpin any good synthetic phonic program. And I think they're very clear to you and I probably. We need to teach the children that there are many letters in English where there is just 1 letter and 1 sound. Is an example of that. Wherever you see that letter, it will say that sound. So they're the easy ones to learn. And if English was full of those sorts of examples, then it would be very easy to learn. But sadly not. There are lots of examples where we have 1, 2, 3, or even 4 letters that make 1 sound. So we just discovered the CK, which says K. And we also have examples such as CH, where we need to remember that these say ch. We might have these three letters, A, I, R, three letters making one sound, air. And some people would consider this an example of four letters, one sound, us, us. But again, that will vary from program to program. The third principle is that we have different letters that make the same sound. So the CH, the K, the C, the CH, the CK, oh sorry, that's an error, that should be CK on the end there, all represent the sound K. And so as children become more confident, they need to understand that there are choices to be made around choosing how they will write a particular sound. And finally, the fourth principle is that we might have the same letters, but we need to remember to pronounce them differently. So in our reading or in our pronunciation, if we see something like OW, we have to make a choice. Is that ow, as in cow, or is it O, as in row? And again, you'll find that different programs teach this differently. So it might be that there's OW is represented as ow, but OA may be represented for O to help the children differentiate. But sooner or later they do need to know that this is a principle. So that's a little bit of background. This is often an important point, but I'll come back to this one later in respect to Little Explorers. Often in synthetic phonics, or almost always in synthetic phonics programs, we don't teach in the order of A to Z. We don't teach in the order of the alphabet. We teach in a different order so that children can quickly learn letters and letter sounds and then immediately use them in the way that I've been outlining, to blend to read and segment to spell. So for example, you often find SATP or SITP, INMD are taught first so that you can then use these letters and show the children how to use them. And this is an example here of the sort of L1 mainstream program where you would then go on to teach these different principles of 2 letters, 1 sound, or here we are, 3 letters, 1 sound, how to blend words with 2 adjacent consonants at the end, or adjacent consonants at the beginning, here with frog, or even words like scrunch where it's 3 adjacent consonants. So you can see the sort of progression that an L1 learner whizzes through in the first 2 years of schooling. Clearly with bilingual learners we just have to go a little bit more slowly and take our time, because they're taking on board so many other skills at the same time and coping with their own language. So to summarize, I think phonics probably can help bilingual learners. I think it helps with hearing and identifying letter sounds. We've talked about the importance of saying pure sounds. I think it helps with learning the sorts of letters or the combinations of letters that represent letter sounds. It helps with blending to read, blending the letter sounds to read, and also segmenting the letter sounds to spell. So arguably it helps bilingual learners both orally and with reading and writing. But what it probably does too quickly is to force children into reading and writing at the same time. And so I think there is certainly some research to be done around that area and how appropriate that is for particularly very young bilingual learners. And the issue about whether you retain A to Z is fundamental to most English language programs. And certainly in Little Explorers, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, for various reasons we did decide to keep the A to Z. So I'll talk about that in a moment. What doesn't synthetic phonics help us with? Well, typically there are always words within English where the phonics doesn't work. And rather than just pretend these don't don't feature, I thought it would be better to talk about these before you ask me about them. These high frequency or tricky words are the words that will trip children up, both as L1 learners and bilingual learners, because they don't follow patterns. So you can do all the preparatory work with synthetic phonics. You can ensure that children understand the rules. You can do lots of singing and games and creativity, but actually there are these words that we have to struggle with. What do we say about these? Well, we say try and use your phonics. If you have phonics, try and use it to work out the word. A word like the, actually if you know that the T and the H are 2 letters, 1 sound, that might help you to remember that this word is the. In a word like said, if you know that the first letter says S and the final letter says G, it's actually then only the middle bit that's a little bit difficult. And once children know that, they're generally pretty quick at remembering that that word's got a tricky bit in the middle. And for a word like when, if you know that WH is 2 letters, 1 sound, then this word is actually phonically decodable because you can say it's w, e, when. So a word is often only tricky until you know the alphabetic code, and when you do and you're using it confidently, then it's no longer tricky. But I would say that, of course, some children find it very helpful to memorize these words. Some children like to look, as in this example here of when, they like to look at what sort of shape the word makes. Or sometimes for a word like people, children might want to remember an image that goes with it. And sometimes we practice the look, say, cover, write, check method of trying to remember the word. So we close our eyes and we say it and we feel it and we write it. And that helps children too. But they are typically not good examples of synthetic phonic practice, but I would say they're still very valuable for many, many children. So as ever, we must take what works best for us, and make it work in our situation with our children. Similarly, with phonological awareness, a lot of the work we do with very young children in learning English is by definition oral work. We want them to speak, we want them to listen very well. And a lot of the work around phonological awareness, so represented here by the images that I often use in presentations, being able to listen to the sounds in the environment helps you to tune in. Can you hear a motorbike, or is that a bird singing? And later on, as children are more confident, that means they're more likely to be able to distinguish between 2 sounds in the alphabet that are quite similar. So can they hear the difference between a B and a P? So we need to tune them in. Are we going to use rhythm and rhyme and body language to help the children to understand how to tune into phonics? Are we going to use musical instruments? Of course we are, because children love to do that. Are we going to sing songs? Yes, because that's part and parcel of our daily language kit bag that we have a lot of fun with. Again, I can't see that bottom picture because it's masked by a pop-up. Here we have somebody coming down a zip wire, representing the idea that we can play with intonation. So can we make our voices go very high and then come down very low as we come down the zip wire, or can we take the person right back up? And can we play with things like alliteration, so 6 smelly silly socks, things like that. Now again, as a purist of synthetic phonics, people would say that those are very nice things to do, they're very useful, they're very helpful, but they're not critical, they're not a critical part of understanding synthetic phonics. As a language teacher of early years, I would say they're absolutely crucial, and I would find it very hard to produce any materials where we weren't suggesting that these are useful and helpful and fun things to do. And certainly most of the programs I'm involved in would verify that. So let's move on to the next slide. So, okay, we've got about 20 minutes, well, perhaps 15 minutes left now, and I wanted to finish by talking to you about how those principles that I've outlined apply to the books within the Macmillan Phonic Explorers collection. Again, I'm not sure how many of you know these books. I'm not sure how many of you might be using them, or whether you're using the English Explorers series, but you've not found a place for these phonic books. But let me explain why they might be useful. They do offer a systematic book-by-book progression of phonics, as I've just outlined. They do mainly follow those principles of synthetic phonics. The only way in which they don't is that we have retained the A to Z. And that is because many of you will be using, I hope, the existing English Explorers program, in which there are these phonic workbooks. I hope you can see that. And because these have been used so successfully for so long, we decided that whatever we produced to go alongside needed to work with those. So you can rest assured that the phonic books, the phonic add-on, does fit with the progression within those books. The other important thing to say is that it's not too big a program. As you'll see along the bottom of this slide, there are 4 color-coded strands, and these fit completely with the existing English Explorer series, so that you can slip these books in and use them seamlessly with the material you've already got. And within each of the colors, you'll see as indicated here, there are just 4 stories. So there are 16 little books offering you a very book-by-book systematic introduction to phonics. And we felt that that was going to make it very easy for you to use in the classroom. This is the structured sequence within those books. I'll talk a little bit later about the sort of materials you can download to help you, but for those 16 books, there's a whole free downloadable teacher's book, which I downloaded for the session. So this, and I'll come back to this later, this offers you all the guidance you will need on the sorts of things that I'm about to say. It outlines the phonics principles, it outlines the sequence, it gives you a lesson by lesson guidance for each book, as well as the sorts of activities and fun and games that we've talked about that we would like you to incorporate in any phonics session. But this is the sequence. Letter sounds, as I've explained, still A to Z for a good reason. We teach CVC with short vowels, again, for good reason, because that fits with the existing phonic workbooks. We teach this important principle of 2 letters, 1 sound. We teach 2 letters, 1 sound with these slightly more unusual combinations. So we teach double letters and the controversial the ng, as in the end of a word like sing or king. We teach initial and final adjacent consonants and how to blend them. So we're not saying fr, o, g, we're saying fr, o, g. We're saying a sound for each letter. We teach the long vowel sounds, A, E, I, O, U, and the split digraph, so A, E, I, O, U with the split. We teach different letters the same sound. So we, for example, here we can teach that AI and AY, as well as the split digraph, can all represent the same sound A. And we teach the vowel phonemes, including IR, which I forgot to put on here. And we teach different letters, same sound as well. So those alphabetic principles which I outlined earlier are all covered within these 16 books. So you can rest assured that it's a very good introduction. And in the downloadable teacher's notes, which I mentioned, there's a really nice, simple structure chart. You probably can't quite read that through the camera, but it outlines which of these features is attached to which book. So you can pick up a book and know that it's focusing on a particular phonic focus. So that should help you too. But let's not forget the fun. These phonics little books are fun. They offer a decodable story. They're not great literature because we are working with tight language restrictions so that the children can access the text independently. That's really our aim. Remember, our aim is comprehension and our aim is independent reading. So we do make the story simple and accessible, but we do have very fun and engaging stories, as you can see. We do also reuse the characters that the children will already know from the Explorer series. So you can see here the little mouse family, and in this one here, the teddy family. In this one here, it's the family, the human family with the mum and the dad and the children who have various adventures. There's a little dinosaur set of characters as well. So if you're using Explorers, then you can see that the children will recognize the characters, and that helps. That helps with familiarity. It gives the children confidence, but it also helps us to ensure that we're telling fun stories. I thought I might have time to read you one, but probably I won't. But do have a look on. If you go online, you can actually access the books and see some samples, so you can see for yourself how a story like this in the mud is actually quite engaging for the children. At the end of every book, there's always a practice and learn section. So you can either, I have labelled this slide consolidation for readers, but it could equally be preparation for readers. And certainly as we look through a typical lesson, you might well decide that you want to prepare the children with the vocabulary. I think this one is from a higher level. I think it's probably Explorer 1 or Explorer 2, because I can see that we're doing split digraph A. We're learning lake and wake and snake, for example. So you'll notice when you go online that there is some free audio support for these pages. So you can go on and you can hear somebody reading aloud the words. They don't sound talk them, and I think this would be really useful for you to do with the children. So it will say 1, lake, wake, snake. But actually what we want the children to be practicing as well is saying a, k, lake. So we're reinforcing that blending for reading. And sometimes we show how we jump from the A to the E to stress that split digraph. So you can see that that's very helpful. There is also usually at the end, on the final page, I don't know if you can see here, a checkup. So you get the practice and learn first, which is the page on my slide, but on the final page you also get a little test or a little quiz, and children really quite enjoy doing those. So every book has that on the last 3 pages. Oh, here's an example of the audio which I wanted to stress. So every book, so each of those 16 books, if you go online, has free audio reading of the whole text for you to download, and also the spoken words, as I've just explained, for practice and learn. So I think some very nice additional resources available for free there to reinforce the use of the book and to help prepare children for the vocabulary. What might a typical lesson look like? Well, generally we would say you need to prepare your approach. So you really need to think about, as I'm sure you do anyway, how you want to tackle this particular book. Will you read the pages first? Will you listen to the story? Will you talk about the cover? Will you talk about the characters? And will you need any props? Will you need any little letter cards or sound cards? Will you use any fun props, like, for example, I don't know if you can see this. This is a little ping pong ball, and it happens to have the grapheme written on it. So will you use some props like this to make the activity an interesting introduction before you tackle the book, to prepare the children? You might have some little plastic You can see that. I hope that's a little hat. You might have some little collections of things like that to get the children really thinking about the vocabulary. You might have some alphabetic letters. Here's some, magnetic letters to help the children to think about the graphemes and the phonemes that they already know. So these are the sorts of things that you can do to prepare. And of course, we always want to be drawing on what we've already taught so that the children can feel confident as that they're moving forward. I'm very keen to make learning active, so the picture I've put on this slide is to actually the word is snake, which is super because it fits with the previous slide. There's no harm in making children stand up and hold their letter and organize themselves in a line so that together they make the word. And there's no harm in, as I've just shown you with the ping pong ball, there's no harm in asking them to choose a ping pong ball so that they can stand up and be active, or ask someone else to choose. These are all very important things, and I think the more active we can make learning, the better. The most obvious thing is, of course, once you've read the book, is to perform it and do a little role play, but I know that that's very, very good common practice. If we think more specifically then about what a reading lesson using phonics might be, I thought it might be useful to talk in general about models of reading, because there are lots of different ways that we can use the book. And so I thought it would be useful to describe some of these with you so that you can see which ones you use or which ones you might like to use. They're all very helpful for any type of book, but it just means that you can practice in different ways with the children and keep it varied and keep it fun, which I think is important. You might decide to start with a model reading, and obviously this is, as it says, where you would read the book for the children. So you may already have done your practice and learn. You may have decided you want to prepare the vocabulary at the beginning, and then you might want to model the story so that the children can hear how you would read the story, and they can be listening out for those phonemes or the phonic focus that they know is in this story. So if it's A, as in the snake book, they can be listening out for those words as you read it to them. Or, of course, you can use the audio. If you're not confident about reading it yourself, you can hear the audio and get the children to listen to it. You might then want to go back and reread the book. We go back to the book over and over again. There's lots of different ways we can do this. So we might want to share the text. So if there's a repetitive refrain within the story, then we might say to the children, every time we hear one of the A words, let's join in together. And you can help to flag when these repetitive refrains occur. Or we might say, I'm going to read a page and then I'd like you to repeat after me. This will help with their pronunciation. Or we can just say to the children, let's listen. Or if you've got some very confident readers, you might say, who would be brave enough to come and read the book for us? Children love to play teacher, so that's a very good technique as well. Okay, in the group, we might decide that we want to do some group reading. And typically, people think that this is taking it in turn to read a page as we work through a book. But if we want to, we can do a guided read where we are reading through the book and discussing as we go the specific phonic foci or focuses that we want the children to work on. We might want the children to work in pairs to reread the book, where one is pointing and listening and encouraging and the other is reading, and then they swap and take it in turns the other way around. Or we mustn't be afraid to ask the children to read independently, because that is our goal. And as I've said before, listening is terribly important for good pronunciation and comprehension. So that's the full range, and you'll find in those free downloadable teacher's notes lots of references to those techniques. So in a rather a rush now, in the last few minutes, here are some activities, many of which you will be very familiar with already, that again may arise from using the Phonic Explorers. We love to sing. We know that's really important, and as I've said before, if we can make the learning as active as possible, then children are going to enjoy it and the learning will stick. We may use letter cards. There are lots of programs now, or downloadable cards, where you can have little, we used to call them flashcards. Typically you want to show the grapheme, but you might want to, on the other side of the card, show the image. It's best if we don't show them together, because we really want to encourage the children to be able to see the letter and know the sound, or typically see the word and work out the word, and then use the picture on the other side to reinforce that they've read it correctly. So we can play lots of games with which one says, or is this letter can you see that? Or a D, and the children have to decide which is the right one, or in the example on my slide, a G or a D. Sound talk I've already referenced. We can have lots of fun with that. Please, can you get me a D pen? And if the children haven't heard that correctly, they'll bring you a green pen. So immediately you know that they're not hearing those sounds correctly. We need lots of examples of, can you say it? Can you write it? That whole blending and segmenting, two sides of the same coin, two different sides of the same coin. We can do lots of sorting activities. We can get children to hold the letter cards and move into the correct sequence. Remember that picture at the bottom of the previous screen where we were getting children to move around? And you can do that with sentences too. So if you've read something like Crazy Cat and Fat Old Rat, you could give out the words of the title and get the children to organize themselves to make the title make sense. You can find your partner. So you could give children, some children must hold the letters and some children must find their picture partner. So this works very well if you want the children to be standing up and mixing around. If you've got the room, I know not everybody has the room, but if you have, it's a very fun thing to do. Can you, we call this one Find It. Can you read the word and then search for the hidden picture card? So again, if you've got room, can you hide picture cards around your classroom and ask children to choose a word card and read the word and then go and find the picture that matches it? And I always say this, don't forget the good old-fashioned games such as bingo and snap. I'm sure all of you are using these, but they work just as well for phonics as they do for all the other sorts of reasons that you might use them. So you can play letter sound snap, or you can play grapheme snap, or you can play phonically decodable word bingo. So really make the most of these. This was just a reminder now, as we're coming to the close, that the support for teachers is there for you to download and backs up a lot of the things that I've tried to squeeze into this time. And it is free, and there are lots of fun activity ideas to guide you through using these 16 books. It's amazing how much work you can actually get from a fairly small package. And you can see here lots of examples of children being very active and reading independently too, which is what we want. In rather a rush at the end, but I think that's just about everything that I want to say to you today. I hope you do enjoy exploring the Young Explorers Phonics books. The only difference, if I just reiterate this, is this jigsaw at the bottom will indicate to you the difference between the normal Explorer books and the Phonic books. So if you're not sure, that's where to look to clarify that you've got the Phonic books. These are my contact details. I haven't left very long for questions, but I'm happy to answer a few if anybody's got some questions, that's fine. Or similarly, you can contact me on my contact details here. I hope you found it helpful, and I look forward to meeting you again online or otherwise at some point. Many thanks for listening. Are there any questions? you want to come back around? Okay, I'm going to. We're not sure that we're seeing any questions here, so I'm going to hand over now to Henry, who will talk about the certificates for you.
Hello again, everybody. Thanks to Jill for a great presentation. I am just, as she said, going to talk to you briefly about the certificate, which we've had a few questions about. I've posted it in the chat window. That's the link, which you'll see coming now. It's a PDF, and I'm just going to get it up on the screen for you as well. Just bear with me 1 second. Should be appearing any second now. Just give me a tick if you can see that. Okay, so this is for you to save and print off at home, and then once it's printed you just need to add your names and sign it at the bottom. Don't worry, it will be available on the website too after the talk's finished. So if you can't do that right away, then don't panic. There will be chance later. And we will be sending the slides around as well. I know a few of you are quite keen to see them again. If you check back tomorrow, hopefully the whole recording will be on our YouTube channel as well. But you'll all get an email, probably tomorrow again, with all that information. I'll also make sure some of the links to the resource sites are made available to you as well, because I saw that people were asking about those too. Thanks again for coming, everyone. I'm just going to wrap this up now. So I hope you all found it useful. Thanks to Jill again, and we'll see you for our next session in a few months. Thanks again for all your support. Okay, bye everyone.